where if you could sign him to some sort of extension, you know what you have. And obviously the Vikings, I'm sure they really like what they have in Anthony Harris as a safety.
Right. It's not about him as a player at all. It's about the situation that they've backed themselves into with the salary cap, which as of today, with no moves by the Vikings at this moment, they are looking at, I'm pulling this up right now, $12 million in salary cap space, 12.485. And if they have plans to sign Dalvin Cook to an extension, you're probably adding at least $5 to $7 million. You have to sign your draft class, which probably approaches $10 million. This is where it gets really tricky because then you have to do something else. If you sign Anthony Harris, then you have to trade Riley Reif or cut Riley Reif or cut ties with someone else or rework somebody else's contract, which might be Harrison Smith. And if you're Harrison Smith, I don't know how thrilled you are to change your contract because they're trying to sign another safety. So, it does become very difficult if that's what they're going to do. It is feasible to sign him to a contract that would have a low cap hit next year and then bigger cap hits as they go on. But that's also how they've gotten themselves into trouble. And if you're the Vikings, you do need to ask yourself the question, how replaceable is the position next to Harrison Smith, Sage? Because they put in an undrafted free agent there in Andrew Sendejo. He ends up working out and having a good NFL career. They get Anthony Harrison there, and he succeeds and has a Pro Bowl caliber season, even though he didn't make it. I mean, you've got to wonder
there's a
about
major difference, by the way. I see Sendejo as a hitter, right? Not that Anthony Harris can't, bring the wood every once in a while, but he's not as good a cover guy who can either cover some man-to-man or just sort of that, rangy free safety who has a knack for the football. Sendejo wasn't that nearly as much as more of a guy who was more of an enforcer, more of a hitter. And so there were two different types of safeties opposite Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith. I think Anthony Harris is a much better match because Harrison likes to be, roam around near the line of scrimmage. I think even a little bit more than deep, and you got to have a deep guy if you've got a guy who's really good around the line of scrimmage, and that's where I think Harrison Smith really pays a lot of dividends for this defense.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any debate about how good Anthony Harris is at the job that they give him. I mean, he leads the league in interceptions and is the top 3 safety by Pro Football Focus. It's only that I wonder if because Harrison Smith is so versatile and so excellent, and I think if he keeps going like this, he's got a good chance to make the Hall of Fame or at least be that caliber of player. If he has 5 more years at the level of play that he's had over the last 5, then he's got a shot at that. And he makes everyone better around him on the entire defense. He, in my mind, has been the centerpiece of the defense for the entire Zimmer era. So the question is it worth paying Anthony Harris a salary cap hit, even in 2021, that's going to be 12 or 15 or $17 million or something like that, because you need to structure it to have a very low cap hit now. So even though they're talking... I think,
obviously, the Vikings aren't going to get aggressive on an expensive player in free agency, it looks like, correct? Unless somehow we end up with the trade with Washington, right, for the left tackle position, but we also would give up some salary. So, it doesn't look like there's going to be some super expensive player from another team that's going to come here. So it's the money of Dalvin Cook, right? I think that is part of this conversation is What are they going to do with Dalvin Cook? Are they going to extend him? And if they do, and we all love Dalvin Cook, just like the LA Rams 3 years ago absolutely loved Todd Gurley.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out. And there's just this thing with running backs time and time again. And it didn't work out great for even Dallas last year when they signed Zeke Elliott to the big deal. They didn't make the playoffs. And so the question is, do you pay your running back that much money no matter how good he is? And Dalvin does have that downside of being hurt, on occasion. So the real question is, do you want to sign him to a big extension, to an extension, or do you just go, you know what? It's going to be more about the offense and the offensive line and the scheme, going back to that those Denver era of, they rarely spent, collateral on running backs, whether it was in free agency or paying guys or even in the draft. I mean, I think Clinton Portis was a second rounder. It's like, oh, wow, Mike Shanahan actually went for a higher running back. They usually get guys in the 7th round.
And then they traded him.
Yeah, and they ended up trading him, getting some value for him. So, that is the question is, do they decide, we're just going to take the route of an expensive tailback, expensive quarterback, expensive offensive line, defense, and have a certain, sort of business model that doesn't include paying your running back a lot of money, no matter how good he is, right? And so that is, I think nobody knows that, and I guess we'll know a lot more. And they can do the franchise tag; they always can do that. It's you pretty much have the ability to sign a 1-year extension, if I'm not mistaken, that they could add just one more year to them and ride that running back train sort of one more year. And if you lose out on them, hopefully. I wouldn't be surprised if Madison could run for 1,000 yards or 1,200 yards as a running back in this system, the way they blocked last year. I think he's a good player, so maybe they go that route just because it's less expensive.
So there's another part of this too, and I'll circle back to that Delvin point in just a second. But things really change with the salary cap after June 1st, and with no OTAs anyway. A lot of times, once you get to those OTAs and mini camps, you feel like you've got your team, so you don't see a whole lot of changes between June 1st, even though the salary cap structure changes. And why this is, I don't know. I'll have to have someone on to explain it to a T because it's complicated. But just going by overthecap.com, if you change things over to after June 1st, you can make a lot more cap space by trading people and in some cases cutting people. I'll give you an example. If the Vikings were to trade Riley Reiff after June 1st, they can make $11 million in salary cap. Right now, they can only make 8. And even somebody like Anthony Barr, you could trade him and make $10 million in cap space after June 1st. But before June 1st, you can't do that. That you won't make any salary cap space. So a lot of things change. Even Kyle Rudolph, who I wouldn't think they'd want to give away considering the weapons that they have now, he's still important. But trading him after June 1st makes $7.3 million in cap space. So with the way that things are plodding along here in the offseason, and we're all sort of sitting and waiting because the league is essentially shut down in some ways, though we're going forward with the draft, but they can afford to be patient here. You don't have to sign these draft picks until you actually get into training camp. So anything before then, you can wait and do some cap manipulation and contract extensions at a later date if you want to. Now, what you said about Dalvin Cook, my thing with him is I understand the history of running backs recently, and the Todd Gurley example is definitely probably a haunting one for everybody at TCO Performance Center. But when you look at them signing Cousins to a contract extension and wanting to win in 2020, you can't have him holding out. I mean, yes, Alexander Madison's good, but Dalvin Cook, when Adam Thielen was out, he averaged over 10 yards a reception last year. How many screen passes did he take that were 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage and turn them into 20 yards? Because he is a special player, and he is very much still in his prime.
Player. And he's in his prime. He's a special player. He has the sort of afterburner type speed that you just don't see very much in running backs. And he also finishes plays with power. He is, he and Stephon Diggs were the best weapons of this football team last year. And now Stephon's gone, and so he's even more important. So, I mean, if you just watch a Vikings game throughout the year, you go, yeah, they're obviously trying to get the ball to Dalvin Cook. He seems to be their best player. They throw him a lot of screens. That they obviously get the ball out in the backfield, but he's got some quick feet and he's super fast as well. I mean, he's a special running back, and the question is, do you pay a guy like that because you don't know the future? And that's the whole thing with running backs is you don't know the future. Like they're like if you pay insurance on a car, there's somebody that's been in a lot of accidents. Running backs have, and the question, which is the accident that sort of makes the car not drivable or not drive as well anymore. And he's a Porsche, and you ding things up and you mess up the wheels or whatever. It's just not going to drive as fast and good as it was before. It doesn't take very much sometimes, but he is a special player. This offense relies on him a lot, and when he wasn't playing over the last few years when he's been hurt, the offense hasn't been as good and as consistent.
Right. So that one, we might have to wait quite a while into the summer for the Vikings to figure out some of these other salary cap things. And it might take until after June or right before training camp. They have done that before where they've announced contract extensions right before training camp, and there will be no OTAs for him to skip. So that would have been a huge story for us. Like, oh, Dalvin Cook's not at OTAs. He's not at off-season workouts because he doesn't have a contract. Well, now nobody's at off-season workouts.
Well, can I say something about the off-season thing, by the way?
Yeah.
Did you see that Adam Schefter little spiel last night?
Yeah, that OTAs are probably going to get canceled. Yep.
Well, his OTAs are done, and he's sort of, he works basically, he works for the NFL. They're in the business, and that's where he gets his information, all those things. Coaches, GMs, owners, all these people. Schefter's, of course, has relationships with, and he sort of called out the NFL last night, saying, the NFL just refuses to listen to anyone with common sense of like, let's move this draft back. Like, we're not going to do OTAs, so what's the hurry? Of doing this thing right now, and with what's going on. So you haven't seen a ton of that, and he made a comment last night. We'll see, how it holds. And so, anyway, I got off track there. But speaking of the off season, is we're talking about the Vikings having a lot of rookies maybe playing this year.
Yep.
That they've got 2 first round draft picks, and they let go of they traded Diggs, so there's one, a couple corners, maybe a defensive end. Like, there's some spots we're thinking 4, maybe more spots on this team that will be rookies. We think they're not going to have an OTAs. Those OTAs and that rookie minicamp, I cannot tell you the value of those for a young player.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different world coming from college to the pros. All these guys have done their college thing, and then they're working out. Other than that, like, they're not really learning pro football. And then you walk in, and it's like, the advanced aspects of the double A gaps. There's all these things that they have to learn, and to do it without that rookie mini camp, of which you get to do it at a slower pace and simpler plays and simpler defenses, just so these young guys can go up there and try to execute, and then the varsity sort of shows up the next week, and then they have all those OTAs in the mini camp, and and then have that break and go, okay, that I saw what happened there. Now we get to like a month or 5 weeks off before we go to training camp, and you can study up on those things. I'm sure they can watch film on those things. They're not going to have really that. They're going to have, I'm sure, some sort of virtual meetings, but they're not going to have all that group learning stuff, which just will really, really inhibit their ability to perform well, 5 weeks after they show up for training camp, if there's even that much. I mean, who knows where this is going to go? But let's just say there's a normal training camp. Only having 4 or 5 weeks total to put before the regular season starts, that is asking a lot if you're going to have 4 rookie starters.
And this is a Dalvin Cook point in a way too, because the offense is going to have to drive the success in 2020 if they're going to have it. I mean, right now, if you look at the roster and you look at the rest of the league, it's very much up in the air where the Vikings would be at this moment, because we don't know who's playing a lot of positions. But what we are getting a pretty clear picture of is that it's not going to be Jadeveon Clowney. It's probably going to be, like you said, a lot of rookies having to fill spots, or guys who are less experienced having to fill spots on defense. But the offense is largely going to be the same. And even though I like what Alexander Mattison did, if you're taking away the biggest weapon that they had last year in Dalvin Cook, and then asking the offense to drive your success and be the reason that you win week in and week out, not just last year where it was kind of, you beat the teams you were supposed to beat. A lot of times you got good defensive performances. There were a few games where you had to win and get something really good out of your offense, say like against Denver in the second half. But a lot of times, you were playing David Blau, or, they start off in Atlanta with an interception, and you're just kind of off, and you can dominate with the running game. Or in Los Angeles, you get a bunch of turnovers. The Vikings defense caused a ton of turnovers last year. If you're not doing that, because a lot of your players are inexperienced and you're getting in shootouts, you can't be -1 weapon with Dalvin Cook. And this, it kind of speaks to the short-term view that they have to have after signing Cousins to a contract extension. Because if you had a long-term view, you might go, okay, well, whatever. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out for 2020. We're looking forward. But if you're still expecting to be a contender, then you better have that guy in your backfield.
Yeah, and not having Stephon Diggs right now, that's big. By the way, I saw your little mock draft, or what you did the other day. It looks like
that is
Vikings.
A draft sim.
I liked it, by the way. I liked the whole thing with 2 wide receivers going not in the first round, but maybe like second, third round type of thing, because they're good, and you just got to you hope that one of them is really good and ends up being a starter.
Yeah.
And you have sort of you double your chances right there. So Dalvin Cook's very important. He's very important to Kirk Cousins. It's one of those deals where Dalvin Cook makes everybody else better, right? I mean, he's one of those guys. He's on the field. He is making Adam Thielen better. He's making Kirk Cousins better. He's making the offensive line better. He's that type of player. The question is, how do the Vikings afford to pay him long term? and how that then, back to the beginning of the conversation, how that affects the Anthony Harris scenario, because there's just only so much money in this pie that they have, and that they're fairly close to the top, and they've done what they can to clear some room, but that's also caused them to open up starting positions that they have to somehow fill.